Welcome back, Bantwana Benkosi. We are going to discuss in this segment of Power Talk on Power 987 the question of the state of the Hawks and their future. As we all know, General Libya, Godfrey Libya, who not resigned, but his term of office came to the end sometime last week, left the helm of the Hawks. The Hawks is quintessentially the successor for most of us who have a good memory of the Scorpions. And the Scorpions were disbanded then they were succeeded by the Hawks. I'm joined to reflect on all of this by firstly Andy Mashaile, security strategist and former Interpol ambassador. Welcome to Power Talk, Andy, and thanks deeply for joining us.
Sometime, big brother, and regards to all of the heavyweight champion show listeners for this mid-morning heavyweight champion show.
I'm also joined by Willem Els, Institute of Security Studies Specialized Units. Welcome and thanks deeply for joining us.
Thank you, and good morning to Andy as well.
Thank you. And finally, I'm joined by former spokesperson of the Directorate of Special Operations, Sipho Ngwema. Was the spokesperson of the Scorpions. Is that correct, Sipho?
Good morning, and indeed that is correct. Scorpions were part of the entire NPA operations. It included a number of other units. Yes, indeed, you are correct. Good morning, leader.
Good morning, and thanks very much for creating time.
Always a pleasure, and thanks, and good morning to your listeners as well.
Yes, I want to start with you, Sipho. Just for the benefit of the memory of the public, remind us what the Scorpions were. I've got a lot of listeners that were incredibly much younger at the time. So if you keep it as 101, introduction to the Scorpions and some of their key achievements, as it were, during their tenure.
Thank you. Wow, I think it was early 1999 when President Mbeki had just been appointed the President of South Africa, succeeding President Nelson Mandela. And he had asked members of the security establishment on how to tackle crime. Crime was beginning to emerge as one of the biggest headaches in the country at the time. And then we, in the NPA, made a suggestion. In fact, the Director of Public Prosecution, Mr. Mbuyiseni, made a suggestion that there must be a well-resourced outfit that included prosecutors, investigators, and other specialists. It must be well-funded, as I said, but also well-trained, and the capacity must be able to meet the challenges that existed at the time. And then it was launched in Zuletu on the 1st of September that year, after the president had announced its establishment in June in his inaugural speech as a president that year.
And maybe just speak to us about its capacity on the one hand, and then the second part of the question that I had initially asked related to its major operations and major achievements in fighting crime.
Thank you. The Scorpions had just over around 500 members in all the major provinces. I think initially when it was formed, it was focusing on car hijackings, which were beginning to be a serious problem in Gauteng, political violence in KZN. As you know, that one of the first operations was to discover arms cache in KwaZulu-Natal, which was supplied by the previous government to the Inkatha Freedom Party at the time. And thirdly, in Cape Town, it focused on gangs. And also there was an emergence of a political outfit called Pahad, which was attacking those they suspected of being involved in drugs. But also then, as it evolved, it focused on corruption, it focused on high-impact offences, particularly crimes against the state, cases that emerged from the previous political engagements. And the major, I think, successes, for example, in Cape Town, working with other law enforcement outfits, was the dismantlement and the conviction of virtually all the leadership of Pakhat, which was responsible for the bombings there, the killing of people. In Gauteng, the number of gangs and even those who were behind car hijackings and other crime-related activities. Those were convicted. And exactly in KZN, the same thing, the number of people who were convicted of political violence. But also in Cape Town, I must add the fact that there were a number of MECs, if I remember well, that were convicted. There were a number of political leaders that were involved in corruption, same as elsewhere in the country. And with the Scorpions was the asset forfeiture unit. So those instruments were used effectively to deal with crime. So those are some of the cases that come to mind right now. I'm sure as we speak, there will be a number of others that I can think of.
If you've just joined us, this is Power Talk with me, Mbuyiseni Ndlozi. We're speaking the Scorpions, the Hawks, and the future of the Hawks. I do have the final sort of question related to the reasons, as you might recall. I mean, most of these things are judged on the basis of political independence. How would you rate the independence of the Scorpions in relation to political interference and going for as a corruption buster, as it were?
As far as I know, most of the cases of the Scorpions are well known, and unfortunately, the sensitivity comes when you have to differentiate between a political criminal and Sipo in the street. And I think this is where the challenges came from. But I think, as you know, the success rate of the Scorpions varied between 80% and 95% in terms of its conviction rate with regards to the number of cases that it took. The courts have pronounced long ago with the initial establishment of the Hawks and the fact that there were issues. I think Judge Museneke is the one who made that ruling in terms of the independence of the Hawks. And I think the number of interventions that were done to ensure that there is a level of independence of the Hawks versus what the independence in terms of the statutes of the Scorpions at the time. And I think even now the Hawks have got, I think very few people know about the fact that there is a judge solely responsible. It's an oversight function. The cops have got IPIT, the general policeman, but the Hawks have got a judge. And that judge is responsible for the operation of the Hawks and to ensure the issues that you have raised, issues of independence, issues of impartiality, but also to ensure that the Hawks act according to the law. And the same with the Scorpions. The establishment of the Scorpions under the NPA Act, which is an autonomous organization or agency within the Department of Justice, ensured that kind of independence in terms of its decisions and in terms of its operations. And I think history has also recorded some of the challenges that came with that later, which then led to its disbandment. Remember, there was a Genoala Commission which looked at what the then Director of Public Prosecutions, Mr. Piccoli, would have done, which is the searching and the subsequent arrest of the head of, at the time, I think, Interpol and also the South African Police Service, Mr. Jacques Levy. But also there were issues around the then Deputy President, Mr. Jacob Zuma. And those political issues, unfortunately, particularly the Zuma ones, are the ones that led to the throwing away the baby with the bathwater. And I think that regressed some of the gains that have been made in fighting crime in general.
Let me bring you in then, Andy. Particularly your reaction to the last sort of set of questions, but also your recollection of the major sort of achievements of the Scorpions.
The Scorpions performed exceptionally well, my brother Mbuyiseni. The result and that total picture painted onto the canvas of time on your show by Ndlozi Sipongwema speak to the heart, the appetite of what we will be focusing on, the appetite of the Hawks in terms of dealing with serious criminal matters. These the transnational organized crime, crimes of human trafficking, crimes of arms trafficking, money laundering, which have seen both you and I, Mbuyiseni, being frustrated by South Africa being on the grey list as a result of FATF saying you, South African financial systems, you are actually creating a vector, a platform where funding for terrorism and other issues are easy for the international criminal who happens to be involved in terrorism, amongst others, involved in money laundering, involved in your cyber crime victims' proceeds or money being stolen and being deposited in a South African bank somewhere in Cape Town. You and I would know that the Hawks effectively engaged with your U.S. Secret Service, your FBI, in the tracking and tracing of the 30-something guys who were arrested the 8 guys who were arrested in Cape Town, and some of the, I think 2 people were arrested up here in Johannesburg with regards to the 100 million rands that was stolen. I've now converted it into dollars, stolen in Florida from the romance scam. So the picture, the predecessor of the Hawks, the Scorpion, laid a very powerful foundation, culminating in a message of integrity in Tatelibia, being results-driven, having studied transnational organized crime and organized crime just in general, having had looked at the modus operandi of the unit of which Tafiga, like we would call him in a township, has mentioned. I'm referring to Sipongwema. So the relationship, the nexus between the Scorpions that have fallen away and the Hawks, the nexus becomes the focus on what can lead South Africa to a successful, better crime manage or crime fighting outcomes that we are looking for, reflected in the crime stats that the people have much more in-depth understanding and interest on.
And Willem, your recollection, of the Scorpions, and like particularly just to provide the background upon which we're going to make this assessment of the Hawks, what were their major achievements according to you? And would you agree that the key to their disbandment, as it were, was, as Sipho is saying, the case against President Zuma?
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think your 2 panelists really nailed it, and they really explained it very well. My take on this whole thing is because the Scorpions were more independent. They didn't fall under the police at all, and I think the leadership, and also for only 500 members, they really batted high above the league. So they really did well, and one of the things is they were well resourced. They were able to gather handpicked operators and judges and prosecutors around them. It was prosecution-guided investigations that took place. But also what we saw is that it seems that there was a much more independent sort of environment that they operated in than, you remember, the Hawks, not to take anything away from them, they report to the National Commissioner of Police. So they're supposed to be independent, but it's also a blurred line most of the time between them. So I think they was very effective. And they also, without fear or favor, they investigated, as you mentioned, Commissioner Lebe. But when they started to look at the political figures, like you mentioned Zuma, of course, then they were targeted. And that actually led to the closure of the unit, the targeting of General Dramat and all of those people in order. And then they started with a state capture where General Mhlameza was taking over, and it went south from there.
But why in your view was it important for the Scorpions or a body of that particular nature to not be under the police? What's the significance of that?
I think it guarantees more independence. If you are a investigating body and you are looking at very, very intricate and sensitive cases, you have to be protected in the first place from political interference, and secondly, you have to be able to do your work without fear or favor. And I think they in the environment that was created for the Scorpions was much more conducive than that the Hawks had to operate or has to operate on.
And Sipho, is that your view as well? Why does it give it more teeth when the unit of priority crimes is located outside the police?
Thanks again, Mbuyiseni. I think Willem has also nailed it now. One, in terms of independence, but I think the most key differentiator is the fact that they were prosecutor-led. Remember, it was a multidisciplinary organization. And let me use soccer, for example, football. With what the instruments we have now in fighting crime, the defenders are located elsewhere, the strikers on the other side of town. They only meet when they have to go and play a game. And what was with the
they don't train together.
No, they are not in the same office. They are not under one command. And this is the problem. And the reason they had to be located in the National Prosecuting Authority is because the prosecutors who take the matters to court are in the National Prosecuting Authority. And these people would then interact on a daily basis. You run an office there. Everybody, all of us who are listening, run offices. You can't have members of your office lying all over town and then go in an operation together. You need to work together every day, check the progress, and make sure that there is quality control in terms of what you're doing. And the Hawks are trying their best. The NPA is trying their best, but the problem is in the legislation. And I think what the independent directorate is being turned into now is trying to begin to solve that problem. But Willem has also mentioned it, which is the biggest key differentiator between the Hawks and the Scorpions is resources. The Hawks, unfortunately, are not adequately resourced, and this is what has worked against them. They have run below capacity. They do not have the relevant or do not get time to do the relevant training. The Scorpions went overseas. They were in Britain, they were in Cuba, they were in the United States, getting the best training of those institutions, exchanging notes all the time. And this is why the number of elements within the model of the Scorpions that were emulated by even the FBI. So we then threw away that baby with the bathwater, and this is why today we are facing those challenges. I'm sure later we are going to begin to talk about...
Sipho, what do you mean emulated by the FBI? Which one was emulated, the Hawks or the Scorpions?
The Scorpions, the model of the Scorpions. And in fact, this even took it to gender-based violence, because we took exactly the same way in terms of locating the gender-based violence unit within, even though it was not in the Scorpions, but it followed a similar kind of model. And that's why it's important that when the people are working on a project, you can't have them lying all over town. Now, what you have, and this is why you have a situation where the police are going to say, we have handed over the docket to the NPA to take a decision. And that takes about 3 months. And after 3 months, and then they get an instruction, please go and talk to Sipho, Mbuyiseni, and Willem. That takes another 3 months, right? But if we were in the same office together, I'm able to say to you, did you speak to so-and-so, go tomorrow? Instead of 3 months, and this is the problem now, is that the separation or the not co-location of these very important instruments
it delays justice.
Exactly, and that's why cases now take 5 to 6 years. There may be other reasons, but that is a key reason as well.
So, in essence, your idea is that's what made one of the big muscles or teeth in the advantage of the Scorpions, which at the moment is not for the Hawks.
Exactly. Remember, the head of the Hawks, General Bibia, a great gentleman, reports to the National Police Commissioner. The head of the other side of the NPA, I know he was working very close with the late Rodney Dikoko, who passed away in January, reports to the Director of Public Prosecution. So you have got two different commands, and the same applies to people on the ground. When the key word for the Scorpion was under one command. That was the key differentiator. And all these agencies, you had the capacity to then investigate, you had the capacity to prosecute, but also you had the capacity to analyze. The analysts, which to some extent had intelligence capacity, were able to be in the same room, work together, rather than be not collocated. And that's where our biggest challenge is right now.
It's 10:30 here on Power Talk, Bantwana Benkosi. We are speaking the Scorpions and then trying to lay ground to discuss the performance of the Hawks, particularly under General Libya, and then try to map a future, as it were. Stay tuned as we take the headlines with Nyakalo Tefu.
Power Talk with Mbuyiseni and Ndlozi, where your voice is heard and opinion matters.
We are continuing our conversation on the Scorpions and the state of the Hawks and their future. I'm joined by Ndi Mashaile, Security Strategy and former Interpol Ambassador. I'm also joined by Sipho Ngwema, former spokesperson of the Scorpions, Directorate of Special Operations, and Willem Els of the Institute of Security Studies Specialized Units. We are speaking about the Hawks following the tenure of General Libya that has just come to an end. Sipho, I wanted to allow the sort of framing ultimately of the strengths in comparison, as it were, to the functionality of the Hawks, the strengths of the Scorpions. You have noted the first thing is that prosecutors worked together with investigators, meaning prosecutors and police work in a single unit and they are commanded by a single individual. In practical terms, in numbers, are you able to give us what that resulted into?
Thanks once again. Look, as I said earlier, the conviction rate was anything between 80% and about 95 to 98%. And there were about 500 members of the DSO. That included investigators, that included prosecutors, analysts, but also the members of the elite task team, which was then responsible for advanced tactical responses. Look, those numbers, of course, because the Scorpions were not dealing with everything. They are minute compared to what the South African Police Service numbers are with regards to how many people do we have on the ground. Remember, those numbers have to do with the number of population and the areas that have to be policed. But the criteria for the Scorpions was to look at high impact offenses, was to look at corruption, but also was to look at cases against the state, as well as cases where there was corruption within the enforcement services. So it that meant that it's an elite unit that does not just deal with everything. It won't deal with your crime of cell phone snatching. It won't necessarily deal with your housebreaking unless those have to do with a particular gang or particular criminal element that is under their investigation in terms of organized crime. And then those people can face those charges. But ordinarily, they were not what is loosely termed Bobby on the beat, dealing with street offenses, but they were focused on organized crime. They were focused on those offenses that were mentioned earlier: money laundering, corruption, and all those complicated offenses that needed specialized training and capacity.
I mean, one of the interesting stats about them was that in 2005 and 2007 alone, they were able to seize over 1 billion rands worth of assets and contraband worth also 1 billion. I mean, with 368 investigations, completing 264 of these and prosecuting 214. That's an 85% conviction rate at that time. That's the Scorpions alone. But Velem, are you able to draw the first 10 years before Libya of the Hawks? Firstly, I mean, we know who the general was, but how did their performance in comparison to the Scorpions as outlined by Sipho? How would you rate it?
Yeah. In the first place, you have to understand. You're trying to compare apples with pears. If you compare the Hawks with the Scorpions, it's two different entities with two different bodies that reported to different entities, as well as well-resourced, as we mentioned, the Scorpions. And then they tried to emulate that within the police, but it was flawed from the start because of the independence, because of budgets, and because of the lack of experience. Because most of the people that were part of the Scorpions then moved on to the private sector and so on. So they lost a lot of their expertise, and that showed when you look at the years immediately after the Hawks were established. But they made some inroads. They also focused on your priority crimes, and we also saw of late that they also started to use the same concept of your prosecutor guided investigations, where they bring together these multidisciplinary task teams with the prosecutors on board, and then they investigate these serious cases. And we can see that in the result of the convictions that they get. Because if you look at the conviction, the people that were arrested were under Libya alone. I think they mentioned in excess of 17,000, and almost 5,000 of them were convicted. Now, if you compare that to the crime stats of the police, where we see that your conviction rate or for crimes in general is just above 12%, and for robberies in specific is only 10%. So there was a real difference, or there still is, between your priority crime investigations and, of course, your general investigations.
But before Libya, I mean, you've got this sort of decade, because he comes in 2008. And relatively, the Hawks are sort of formed from around 2009 or so. So 10 years or so, 9 years or so of the first term. And I'm saying that immediately after the disbandment of the Scorpions, the constitution of the Hawks, are you able to paint that first picture for us before Libya, so we get a sense of the ground upon which he assumed office? How messed up, or what was the performance of the Hawks during that period?
Well, of course, they were completely in disarray, because remember there was a verdict that the Constitution doesn't allow the NPA to do that investigations. It must resort under the police, and that was then the decision that was taken to move them under the police. And of course, they had their teething pains and so on and problems, but they were relatively effective from the start, and they got better. And they really started to make their mark. They could never follow the same act as the Scorpions for the reasons that were already mentioned, but they were doing well. And of course, and then they were targeted by the state capture. And you must just understand, whenever you want to bring about a state capture, one of the first targets that you will have is your police and your investigative and your prosecution authorities, because they will be the ones that can inflict lots of pain for you if you break the law as a state capturer. And that is why the Hawks then became a real target for the state in the state capture area.
Ndade Mashaile, what's your take of the first several years of the Hawks, specifically under General Ndlozi?
There was a lot of chaos, and that lot of chaos was systemic. That lot of chaos was infrastructural in terms of resource, congregation and deployment, and the general outcomes in terms of the convictions emanating from the arrest and a sizable number of. There's someone talking in the back.
Yeah, I think it's Mr. Else. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, the performance from your arrest and convictions point of view, comparatively analyzed, were not to the expectation of the people of this country, particularly given the core mandate of the Hawks. When you look at that time and at this period, you will realize, Mbuyiseni, that amongst other things that Willem has spoken about, out of your 18,000 or 14,000 arrests, you achieve a conviction of 4,000 and plus cases. This suggests that there is a much more exciting picture now when you compare it, when you put it on the wall of time and you look at it. The beautiful picture is that now led by Ntate Libya. When I go back to the predecessors of Ntate Libya, there were challenges, Mbuyiseni, that culminated in the two previous national heads of the Hawks not finishing their terms in office. So that speaks volumes between you and I and the listener, suggesting that there have been systemic issues that led to the people who were in those offices not finishing their term. When you compare to this term, Ntate Libya, and him finishing his term with a successful outcome of the mandate as prescribed in the Police Act.
Okay, and Babungwenya, I'm sure you have looked at those numbers. You must have been able to read the immediate response, because Scorpions get disbanded, the Hawks get formed. You must have been able to observe the first few years of the performance of the Hawks. What's your assessment?
Look, it's a very difficult period in terms of elite crime investigations in the country, marked with a lot of instability. I think the initial leader of the Hawks was Anwar Dramat, with all the ups and downs, but I think he tried his best. But at the end of the day, he couldn't finish his term. Same with Tatum Tandazo Ndlozi. He couldn't finish his term. He had his own challenges, which I think led him to appear before the Zondo Commission eventually. But I think what we have seen with this period, notwithstanding all the challenges that they face, it's stability. There's been stability in terms of leadership. I think General Libya is the one who has stayed much longer. Is the one who has been able to operate and to be able to look, I don't want to underscore or to underplay the difficulties that he faced from a human resource point of view, from a technical point of view. Most of the cases, most of the people that commit these offenses that General Libya and his team had to investigate have multiple degrees. They are accountants. they're able to cheat the system. Maybe later we'll talk about those interventions that unfortunately throughout these 10 years you don't have. So the biggest challenge with the initial ones was instability. And some of that instability you could see in court cases, because I think Anwar took the institution to the High Court, and some of the issues, the deficiencies were there, and there were political challenges based on the leadership of the time, based also in the police, I think also politically, which then led to him leaving at a very young age so early. So those are the things that, unfortunately, they tend to have an impact on these structures, on these institutions of state, which are supposed to ensure that we are all safe, we are supposed to ensure that we all conduct ourselves ethically, because there seem to be interest. And I think what has also happened, and I think it was also in the Zondo Commission, there was a systemic attack on these institutions based on selfish interest. And unfortunately, when that happens, when these institutions are then destroyed, it does not affect those people only who get then scot-free, get out scot-free, but it affects the confidence of the country, but also our effectiveness in terms of fighting crime, because your ordinary criminals or criminals that are not political, they are the ones who are the biggest beneficiaries of this, because they are the majority of the people that are being investigated by these agencies.
When you say selfish interest, are you able to give us an example?
I'll give you an example. One of the things, if you look, for example, of the issues that appeared at the Zondo Commission, you could see that there was a lot of litigation, and there was also a lot of resistance by Anwar and other members of the unit, trying to fend off political influences, trying to ensure that there is a level of autonomy, there is a level of independence. And unfortunately, certain people had to go in order to make sure that these institutions are weak. I mean, the affidavit by the former head of police in Ekurhuleni is out there in terms of how these institutions were interfered with. People working, in fact, there was also an affidavit by the former head of secret services. That was before the Zondo Commission, on how there was influence in terms of how these institutions are supposed to perform their, and that has a profound impact on the members of these units, on these units being able to do their work effectively. And those are the challenges. But I think when we see with the tenure of General Libya, you can see a level of stability that has led to many of his people being able to identify suspects, and many of those cases are still in court and they're still being prosecuted.
If you've just joined us, this is Power Talk. We're going to take a small commercial break and we'll continue with the conversation about the Hawks in a moment.
Stay informed. Power Talk with Mbuyiseni and Ndlozi, 9 a.m. to midday on Power 98.7.
Welcome back indeed. Babungwenya, before we let you go, because I know you can't stay with us beyond the 1100 hours.
Yes, my leader.
I'm saying that, am I correct, or you are going to be able to stay after 11?
No, it depends on the questions and whether or not I can squeeze it a little bit.
I wanted to do a last sort of inquiry about effectiveness of investigations in this unit and the role of crime intelligence. What is the relationship? What was the relationship of crime intelligence within the Scorpions in comparison to that of the Hawks?
Thank you very much. I mean, that question is very critical. Let me first start by saying that if you need me a little bit more after 11, I can stay. But let me come back and say, crime intelligence is very key, because you need to have information before crime is committed. You need to be proactive, and part of the challenge now is that we are very reactive. And because these units, with the thing that I said earlier, are running below capacity, way below capacity, it becomes difficult for them to investigate these offenses. But when you have, for example, when we had Pahat, we were able to anticipate what was going to happen. We were able to intercept the activities and be able to hold those who were responsible for those kinds of things accountable before the offenses are committed. Of course, it's difficult in law, and particularly to weigh out a little bit on issues like GBV, because that is very difficult to detect. It's inside the home. But in most of these cases, there's always a group of people who are planning them. There's always a group of people within that who fall out with them and who are able to talk to law enforcement and be able to give information. I know that crime intelligence is not the Holy Spirit. They cannot be all over. However, when you have a sense in a country where people think that or begin to suspect each other, it gives conducive conditions for law enforcement because of their effectiveness. So even when crime intelligence is not there or do not even have an agency there, people get worried.
Yeah.
But now people commit offenses because they know that there's a very little chance of them being caught. And therefore, that's why you need resources to ensure that you have got as many agents on the ground as possible so that you can be able to intervene proactively with regards to these kinds of offenses. The Scorpions worked with those agencies, many of them in the country.
So they didn't amongst themselves have crime intelligence capabilities?
Look, subsequently, there was an initiative. Of course, as I said, the numbers of the people in the Scorpions were low, but there was an intelligence gathering capacity, which the court then said, in terms of the act, the Scorpions were not supposed to do it, so they stopped. However, they could rely on other state institutions. Most of the Scorpions' success had to do with cooperation with other agencies, and this is very key in fighting crime. And I see it emerging now, working with private sector, working with other stakeholders within the society. And I think that this is amongst many other things that need to be done. You can't do this thing alone. Even with the multidisciplinary approach of the Scorpions, stakeholder relations are extremely key.
Yeah.
Forging alliances with other entities on the ground is very key. Having agents, having people on your payroll that are able to give you credible information on the ground is very key. And this is how you are able to a large extent fight crime.
Ndate Mashaile, how do you rate crime intelligence of the two units, Scorpions versus the Hawks?
Ndlozi, last week Monday, myself, General Libya, and Mutibi, SIU, and people from the Gauteng Ethics Advisory Council, and from many other institutions, including IDEC, Independent Investigative Directorate Against Corruption. We sat at Garden Court Hotel somewhere at OR Tambo. And amongst other things that we're doing, I am part of the work stream that talks about strengthening and enhancing law enforcement agencies in South Africa. General Libya made some serious contributions. Let me start off by saying the budget of crime intelligence that Ndlozi,
it's a sorry budget.
It's 4.7 billion as per the slide. When you look at the Hawk, it's a paltry figure between 1 billion and 2 billion and some few rands and cents there. Just from the financial resources, you realize that when you do an analysis and strategic calculations, you realize that with the underfunding that the Hawks have and the results that they're able to produce from a convictions point of view and many other arrests and the active cases that are still in court, you realize that crime intelligence with a big budget might not necessarily be adding value. This is not a negative criticism. It is a criticism aimed at saying to the powers that be, because we have issues and challenges around crime intelligence. Why are we not speaking to Treasury and government to request that 1.5 billion out of the 4 billion falls into the coffers of the Hawks? You now move them from a paltry 2 billion or 2 point something billion rand to 3 point something billion.
Okay.
That will then help you, Ndlozi, close the gap in terms of gathering intelligence, as it is expected to be done by crime intelligence, which obviously have weaknesses left, right, and center, like all organizations.
Let me take the news, and we'll get back just after the news on this question of the relations. And I hope that Mr. Else's line is now a bit clear, because every time we try to reconnect him, he seems to be. But we'll try to get it clear again. It's time for the news. Welcome back. This is indeed Power Talk on Power 987. We are continuing that conversation about the state of the Hawks and its future. We exhausted the state, as it were, of its predecessor, the Scorpions, which had high conviction rates and was much more independent, particularly from the highest echelons of South African elites. It managed to pursue, including pursuing the head of the police at the time, who was also the head of Interpol, Obaba Utshekisa Lebi. They were disbanded and the Hawks were formed. And the Hawks' era in the first 9 years or so was characterized, as you would have heard, by dysfunctionality and a lot of political interference, with its heads mostly not completing their terms, and finally also the feasibility to hold office of Ndlozi being declared by our courts to have been found wanting. I've got still on the line Andy Mashaile, who is a security strategist and the former Interpol ambassador, but also I'm joined now by organized crime investigator at IRS, forensic investigator as well, Chad Thomas. Chad, welcome.
Very good morning to you. So excited to be a part of this conversation.
Yeah, Chad, I don't know if you want to have a bite before we proceed to the state of the Hawks under Libya. If you want to have a bite about the first term before him, just before him, but before he took over, what do you think was the performance of Ndlozi, the state of the Hawks, when Libya took it over?
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Just to touch on what you said during the introduction, and I'm so sorry I couldn't be part of the conversation earlier. The Scorpions were a very successful unit for a number of reasons, but one reason that we have to identify and we have to speak honestly about is that they were cherry pickers. They weren't referred every single priority crime from the police. They got to choose which crimes they wanted to investigate. So they could pick and choose the best cases that would have the most prospect of a successful prosecution. Unlike the Hawks that have virtually everything referred to them and obviously have capacity issues. But to your question about General Berry and Ndlozi compared to General Godfrey Lebeya, it was like night and day. Berry and Ndlozi was not a unifier at all. The Hawks were exceptionally divided under his leadership, and I don't even want to call it leadership, I want to call it rule. It was a very draconian rule. It was exceptionally divisive. The members were not happy, and if your leadership are not happy in respect to the person that's been appointed to head up the unit, it has that Maslow-type effect from the pyramid going down, and it impacts every single member. One thing that Lebeya brought to the Hawks was stability. He brought a sense of stability to the Hawks. He had an open door policy with his members, and right members were appointed into the right positions. So you've got a fairly strong leadership at this point in time. But as he's mentioned frequently, and as I always say, it doesn't help if you've got the enthusiasm, but you don't have the funds to support it. And until the state treats the Hawks as a unit that they can get a return on investment on, the more they invest in the Hawks, the more they're going to get back through civil and criminal forfeitures, the more successful prosecutions they're going to be. Until they have this realization They're going to continue to not budget the Hawks effectively. We're sitting at 51% capacity, which means that they're only half capacitated, and they've been in existence now going on 2 decades. We can't have that.
Ndate Mashaile, same question. What's your assessment of Ndate Libia's performance? Ndate Mashaile? We'll try to reconnect with Ndate Mashaile there. Chad, I wanted to proceed. Can we now speak concrete numbers in relation to the Hawks? I know, for instance, that from leave conviction rates for a while, but we are told that under the Hawks, arrests dropped from about 14,793 to 5,000 around 2014, 2015. And convictions dropped as well from 7,000 to 1,000 or so in the same period. It's just those comparisons, as it were, you realize that it's not just the fact that, as you state, the Scorpions were cherry picking. The volumes of the numbers of cases, ultimately comparisons of you moving from convictions of 7,000 to 1,000, that's apples and bananas. It
is. And again, it comes down to leadership. At that point in time, our country had a low-intensity war against itself. Our police, our Hawks were so factionalized, they were so political, it was quite unbelievable. And the same applied across the board. It wasn't just within the Hawks. When one looked at crime intelligence, when one looked at SAPS.
When you say factionalized, can you break down for us? What does that mean with examples?
If you look at Bering and Hlemeza, where his loyalty lied and how he was appointed, if you look at the standing orders that he sent out to SAPS members that he wasn't authorized to send out, he wasn't the NASCOM, but he was sending out standing orders and directives to rank and file members of SAPS. It created such a divisive environment, and we found that a lot of the people that were appointed by specific political factions within the ruling party as a means to an end to ensure that certain individuals would not be prosecuted and that focus would be put onto other people to score points in what I would term political squabbles. And it was a massive problem, because who suffered at the end of the day? Our population suffered, our people suffered. The same with crime intelligence. We heard at the Mangaung conference how crime intelligence were deployed to monitor the various delegates that were attending the Mangaung conference. That's not the job of crime intelligence. Crime intelligence should be investigating criminal syndicates. So it was hollowed out from the inside. The wrong people were appointed into leadership posts, and we're now seeing that certain members have come into the fray and they're picking up the pieces. And I do believe we've reached a turning point within our policing. We're seeing a lot of success coming out from crime intelligence, from SAPS itself, and most importantly from the Hawks. And with regards to the Hawks, in your view, except stabilizing, in concrete terms, what would you say are the key achievements of Libya, in relation to crime busting? It seems to me that the measurement relates to the set objectives. For instance, one thinks of this is supposed to be a unit that fights organized crime, so cash in transit. You and I were in studio the other day looking at the numbers, for instance, of human trafficking, that they've since increased. And as well, in the list you have cyber crimes and then corruption as well. On those four alone, where would you put Libya? There's an energy within the Hawks that we haven't seen for many years. And it's because of leadership. And it's not just his leadership. It's the people that were appointed at provincial level as well. You take Gauteng, for example. General Mokotedi moved to the inspectorate of SAPS. He was then replaced by General Kadwa, a career police officer. General Kadwa is an operational genius. He's been behind some of the biggest narcotics busts, not just in South Africa, but in the world. And he's been a police officer for over 40 years. He brought a sense of stability into Gauteng, but he wouldn't have been brought into Gauteng if it wasn't for the fact that you had Libya at the national office. These members have been able to impart their knowledge and appoint the right people into the right positions. And we have seen a turnaround. I myself personally this year have seen, in terms of joint investigations with IRS and the Hawks, more arrests taking place in the first 5 months of this year than we most probably saw in the last 2 to 3 years combined. And it seems if the members are finally getting to a point where they can handle the majority of their dockets. They still have too many dockets that they're carrying because there's still too few operational members, but they're getting to a point where the relationship with the NPA, their relationship with their colleagues in SAPS, and the relationship with crime intelligence is such that they're fighting crime rather than fighting and getting involved in petty political squabbles.
Again, I've got to pose this question. While looking, it seems to me, and this is going to be my bone of contention, or rather, not specifically about Libya, but how we judge performance of our police. It's pretty quite frankly not the energy, is that energy must translate into the reduction of specific crimes that are put as an objective for the reasons why the unit is formed. So, but I'm saying when we look at organized crime, let's start with the numbers, for an example, of corruption, the numbers following that of cross-border crime in relation to your human trafficking, drug trafficking, the organized gangsters across different townships, as well as the question of cash in transit. What are the numbers there under Libya's tenure? And can we say, when we look at those numbers, that he has done a good job? Don't you agree that that's how he should be assessed?
I appreciate where you're coming from, Doc, and I don't think it would be fair to judge him from that. We see, as a world phenomenon, an increase specifically in commercial type crimes. We're also seeing an increase in violent crime across the board. South Africa, unfortunately, has become known for extremely high rates of violent crime. We're seeing GBVF at a high. We're seeing kidnap for ransom, where we're number 1 in Africa. We're number 5 or 6 in the world. Cash in transit heists remain a problem. ATM bombings remain a problem. Murder for hire remains a problem. But this has been not just an issue that exists within the investigation there, because that's reactive. It's a societal problem that's led to this. You look at the massive unemployment, you look at the culture of violence in South Africa, it stands to reason that we're going to see an increase. What Libya hasn't had to counter these rises in crime is sufficient members. He had new members come in last year. I think it was 350 odd members. They came straight from police college. They weren't necessarily experienced detectives, but they were given to him to try and increase his numbers, and it almost went up to 60% capacity. But then a lot of members left through natural attrition, through retirement, maybe moving into the private sector, and also they were encouraged to rather leave at 55 with no penalties to their pensions so that they could make room for a younger generation to be employed. So we lost a lot of skill set within the Hawks. At the same time, we see this massive rise in crime. At the same time, when you're expecting the Hawks to investigate, they want to take it to a prosecutor. The prosecutors are also inundated with work, and it bottlenecks at the NPA. They also only want to enroll a case that they believe is going to be successfully prosecuted. So when you look at the most serious of crimes in South Africa, the majority of which are not investigated by the Hawks, like murder, like rape, that's a terrible indicator of real statistics. Murder, you can't really hide murder because there's a body. You only have a 10% conviction rate in this country of all murder cases reported. That means 9 out of every 10 murderers are walking the streets. That's a SAPS issue. When it comes to GBVF, which is horrific in our country and very underreported, of reported rapes in South Africa, we only have a 5% conviction rate. And those are not Hawks matters. Those are matters that are with SAPS. SAPS also has a massive skills deficit when it comes to the number of detectives and the skills that they have. But getting back to the more serious crimes that the Hawks do investigate, they have to do this in conjunction with crime intelligence. Crime intelligence will assist with dismantling operations. They will assist in infiltrating syndicates, because the majority of crimes that are committed, that are investigated by the Hawks, are syndicate related. And that means that their relationship with crime intelligence has to be a solid relationship. And again, they're getting there, because crime intelligence under Ndlozi was also hollowed out. You've now got Kumalo, who's become somewhat controversial, and we believe there's a lot of moves taking place within crime intelligence. But the Hawks can't operate effectively without the resources and capacity that comes with crime intelligence as well. So I don't want to look at the successes in breaking down syndicates and lowering crime in South Africa as being a Libya-driven thing. I want to look at what Libya has done for the Hawks. So what he's done for the Hawks is something that nobody could do. He's brought the stability, and now they can take that legacy and move forward, depending of course, who's appointed in his post, and depending, of course, whether they get more budget, which I do believe Senzo Mchunu is calling for.
I don't know, Chad. I think you are uncharacteristically very lenient, as it were, with this one. Ndate Mashaile, I don't know if you want to come in. We tried to connect you earlier. Let's check if you are there. I mean, there is a certain sense of not subjecting Libya to the necessary constructive criticism about the state of that unit, its ability to work. I mean, we could reach a conclusion that the Hawks will never be successful regardless of who is above them, because of the problems of their being set up. But Ndate Mashaile, what's your assessment when you look at the stats, the rising levels of corruption, reported serious corruption, cybercrime, trans-border organized crime like human trafficking, drugs trafficking, cash in transit, and then Chad just reminded me, murder for hire. Those numbers remain incredibly high. And looking at them, my question is, what did Libya do beyond stabilize, as you all say, the Hawks?
Ndlozi, those numbers remain incredibly high. I agree with you. I want to bring this conversation between you and I and my brother Chet over there to looking at operation. Let's look at operational highlights 24-25.
Yeah.
The caseload at the start of the first quarter of 24-25 was about 18,461 active cases, involving 752,712 charges valued at 1.6 trillion. Let's also look at arrests and convictions. 637 suspects, natural persons, as well as 36 juristic persons brought before the court by General Libya in the first quarter, translated into 506 convictions, including 12 life sentences for those.
This is over 7 years.
No. The first quarter of 2024-2025. Only the first quarter. Agreeing with you that crime remains high, particularly your transnational organized crime, and many of those things remain high. But when I look only at the first quarter in terms of the comparative analysis with the other units, meaning the Hawks that existed before General Libya, the Hawks that existed before General Nkemeza. In one quarter, this is a massive 80% success for the gentleman. I agree with you, Ndate Ndlozi. General Libya is not a saint, just like many of us are not saints. There are some serious challenges within the Hawks from a systemic and systematic operation. What am I talking about, Ndate Ndlozi? When you look at the latest technology that's being used by criminals in one area only of cybercrime, you will realize that we are still using pen and paper in the calculations, in the tracking of your cyber criminals. When you look at other units worldwide, your FBIs of the world here, your Australian Federal Police, your MI6s of Britain, you realize that at the heart of all operations at Ndlozi is artificial intelligence and generative artificial intelligence, which is still a major weakness on our part.
Mm-hmm. I see that. I mean, it seems to me the capacity of the unit on the one hand, but on the other, its location in the SAPS, separate as it were, that a golden collaboration that the Scorpions had with prosecutors, because Chad will attest. I mean, when we are looking at the rest of the SAPS, one of the enduring frustrations is the dockets that get to be compiled, sent to the NPA, remain incredibly high relative to the cases that actually make it to the court and ultimately the convictions. And what you have is a big discrepancy because the prosecutors are no longer working on a daily basis as, for instance, it used to be the case within the Scorpions. My view is to be able to highlight these weaknesses and the ways in which, they predetermine a very failed project of the Hawk, regardless of who is on top of it, as it were. But let's take the headlines. It's 11:30, and then we'll conclude this conversation after the headlines. We're going to take the headlines with Nyaka Lotefu.
Thanks, Mbuyiseni. Good morning once again. In news making headlines at this hour, former President Jacob Zuma has suffered yet another legal defeat after the Pietermaritzburg High Court dismissed his joint application with French arms company Thales for a permanent stay of prosecution. This is in the long-running arms deal corruption case. The application filed by Zuma and Thales argued for the dismissal of the case due to delays and alleged prejudice. Judge Nkosinathi Cili, however, dismissed the application, ruling that the arguments did not justify a stay of prosecution.
On facts presented to court, I am not persuaded that it was sufficiently established that Thales will suffer irredeemable, irreparable, or insurmountable prejudice if the state were allowed to continue with the prosecution in the face of the deaths of Messias the Third and Maynor. Court, seized with the matter, has a duty to consider all the evidence before it, including the non-availability of defense witnesses before returning a verdict. I'm not persuaded either that Mr. Zuma's right to a fair trial will be prejudiced by the non-availability of Messias the Third and Mr. Maynor. I therefore make the following order. The application by both Mr. Zuma and Thales is dismissed.
In other news, the Western Cape High Court is currently hearing arguments from the EFF as the party seeks to oppose the 4% fuel levy set to take effect tomorrow. Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana announced proposed increases of 16 cents per litre on petrol and 15 cents per litre on diesel during his revised budget speech last month. He stated that hikes scheduled to take effect tomorrow are necessary to address ongoing inflation pressures. However, the EFF contends that the fuel levy will only burden the poor and working class citizens, describing it as a regressive tax that must be firmly opposed. Making submissions in court this morning, the EFF's legal representative, Mbuyiseni Siboto, reiterated the party's position and called for the levy to be scrapped.
So is that to say that for the other years this thing has been done incorrectly? Is that the gist of it?
That's the sum total, and there's nothing wrong with the constitutional challenge for the first time. There are many laws in this country that were unconstitutional. They find their way to the court, declared unconstitutional, they are corrected, and we move on. We can't, on the basis of it's always happened that way.
I'm just trying to understand that now the applicant says that, no, that's not the way to do it. You may have done it and gotten away with it, but it's resolved the argument.
More on these and other stories at 12.
In a world where business moves at lightning speed, staying ahead means embracing innovation. From digitizing government, private 5G networks, and safeguarding businesses from cyber threats, MTN Business is at the forefront of change, driving conversations that move industries forward. Power Business is proudly brought to you by MTN, Monday to Thursday, 6 to 8 p.m. MTN. Today, we make moves.
Power 98.7 and Supreme All-in-One coatings are turning up the heat this week. Get the perfect golden crunch on your fried chicken or fish with Supreme All-in-One coating, 1 kg or 4 kg resealable bag. No eggs needed. Just dip in water, coat and fry. Made for caterers, takeaways, restaurants and family meals. Enter Supreme All-in-One competition at power987.co.za now, and you could be one of the daily contestants to compete for a daily prize worth 2,500 Rand on Power Lunch, Monday to Friday from 2 to 13 June. Brought to you by Supreme All-in-One Coatings for consistent, delicious deep-fried flavor. T's and C's apply.
Honey, what are you doing?
I'm stretching for tonight.
I thought you're not dancing at bachelorette parties anymore.
Baby, we need the money to put Johnny through matriek mos.
And what's the police uniform for?
The clients feel safer when I wear it.
No, man, just sell your bucky to We Buy Cars. They give the best prices and they pay you within minutes.
Okay, but can I just go and dance one more time, please? You know how much I love it.
No, the buyer's already on his way here.
Wow, okay.
Strapped for cash? Just sell your vehicle to We Buy Cars. The easiest way to sell your car by far.
Stay informed. Power Talk with Mbuyiseni and Ndlozi, 9 a.m. to midday on Power 98.7.
Final take on the future of the Hawks. Chad, before I go into the future, there's an interesting point you made about cherry picking that was associated with the Scorpions, that at this juncture, the Hawks are thrown any and all types of cases. You seem to, I don't know, can you address me on that? Why is it wrong to have prioritized crime investigation so that there is this sense of the most hardened, the most sophisticated, the most organized of the echelons of South Africa's crime networks must have a prioritization, because when you break them, you considerably undermine crime?
Thank you. Excellent question. The Scorpions were created as the Directorate of Special Operations, much the same as IDAC. They were quasi-independent, but they still form part of the NPA. That means that you couldn't walk into a specific station, have a case escalated to the Scorpions. In fact, I don't remember ever seeing a building that said Scorpions, this is where you report serious crimes. The Scorpions got to choose their crimes. Much the same as IDAC is going to be working primarily on state capture. They've now taken over the Vusi Matala case, which is great, which involves the SAPS wellness tender from June last year. But again, they're going to have an opportunity to pick and choose what they actually investigate. When you look at the mandate of the Hawks and you look at the amount of members within the Hawks, there's 5,000 members, of which about 2,000 are operational. That's out of a police force of 180,000, of which 150,000 are operational. So you're talking a very small percentage. All priority crimes get referred to them over a specific mandate. So let me talk about the mandate. We talk about serious commercial crime, serious corruption. So corruption, take Gauteng, for example. They've got about 11 members in the anti-corruption unit that are meant to investigate every act of corruption by a police officer, by a traffic police officer, by a municipal worker, by a metro worker, by any government employee, by any tender, or any other corrupt act that's taken place. They are wholly incapacitated to investigate the sheer volume of petty and serious corruption that gets reported. They also have to investigate serious economic offenses, serious commercial crimes. They have to investigate syndicates, organized crime, narcotics. They have to investigate the murders of police officers. So anything which is deemed a priority, which is any serious crime, lands up on the desks of the Hawks. It goes via Priority Crime Management Center in Pretoria and then allocated to the various units around the country, of which I pointed out there's about 5,000 members, of which about 2,000 are actually operational detectives. There is no way they can cope with that sheer volume. So what SAPS has done They took an ex-Hawks member who was head of Joburg Commercial Crime, Brigadier Maxson. They made him a major general in SAPS, and they created a parallel commercial crimes unit that's going to now take some of the caseload away from the Hawks and investigate. So he had a very successful pilot project under Brigadier Witboy in Gauteng, Brigadier Sutherland in Cape Town, Brigadier Holby in KZN, and they're rolling out these PIUs around the country that they can start taking on some of the more serious and violent crimes cases to alleviate what the Hawks have to do, as well as some of the more serious commercial crime cases, most probably up to the 20 million mark. Anything above 20 million will most probably still go to the Hawks. That means the Hawks can concentrate on their mandate of priority crimes. But remember, their numbers need to double. We need at least 10,000 members, of which maybe 5,000 will be operational. Then we can start seeing them break in the back of syndicates. But what we also know is the organized crime component, the anti-corruption component, and the serious commercial crimes component do work with their counterparts at the NPA, much the same as the Scorpions did. The SCCU, the Specialized Commercial Crimes Unit of the NPA, works hand in glove with the Hawks in what we call prosecutorial-led or prosecutorial-directed investigations. And that, of course, helps alleviate the legal challenges that may be posed in court at a later stage.
I don't know. Mashaile, shouldn't the Hawks be returned into that capacity to be prosecutorial-led? And that might fundamentally improve its crime-busting capabilities, and you could consolidate all these resources under them.
Ndlozi, you've just hit the nail on the head. Boom. Exactly what in other platforms when I talk and when I address and when I give strategic advice, you don't only need what you've just referred to. You also need to have dedicated courts for priority crime, Ndlozi. When you have a dedicated court that deals with your transnational organized crime, you would then be able, given a beefed up number of the Hawks, you would then be able to have a prosecution-led team that comprises, amongst others, international cooperation, crimes committed in South Africa across the border, or crimes that have been committed elsewhere, transnational here. We would be in a position to can sit down and apply for a court order of that dedicated court. Send it through to Maryland in Washington or Washington, D.C. or Florida, specifically dealing with priority crime. When we do it this way and we are prosecution-led, we will have successful results and outcomes, pushing the stature and the integrity and brand value of the Hawks to that of your Federal Bureau of Investigations and all others in the world. We are operating at that level, but with no resources and underfunding. When we get proper resources, we'll be able to congregate those resources, galvanize them into a formidable organization that would be able to produce the results that the people of this country are looking for. The people meaning the victims of crime.
Okay. The papers are reporting, and now speaking to this question of the future, and you've all pointed to the resources that need to go into fighting organized crime, and particularly organized serious crimes. South Africa is at the top of an international network for serious international networks of drug trafficking, human trafficking, or becoming a playground, as it were. So the papers are reporting that firstly it's a three-way war, three-way sort of future competition between Shadrach Sibiya, Tibello Musikidi, and Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi. I'm going to start with you, Chad. Who do you think should succeed General Libya, and why?
Musikile comes from an FCS background. She was head of detectives in Gauteng under General Petros. She's been in a leadership position now in the NASCOM's office as the Deputy National Commissioner for quite some time. She has the experience. She has the respect of the members. Sabir was within the Hawks. He left the Hawks. He was then at Group Forensic Investigation Services at City of Joburg. Mkhwanazi is a policeman. I don't think his skill set would necessarily be fitted in Hawks. He should be in a senior position in SAPS on a national basis, where he was in an acting post a couple of years ago. If you had to ask me between Sabir and Musikile...
Oh, wait. You have to break that down for us. What does it mean? This is South Africa's favorite policeman. You just dismiss him like that, like he's some constable or warrant officer.
No, I believe he would be wasted at the Hawks. The Hawks are a reactive investigative unit. You need somebody that's respected at the helm. So I'm talking about Mkhwanazi being considered for the NASCOM post, replacing Fani Masemola when Masemola's contract comes to an end. I think Mkhwanazi would be wasted at the Hawks.
It's just the way you put it. You said is a policeman. So we didn't know what that meant.
Yeah. So I want him to be the national head of the policing because he's a proper policeman. He's a policeman's policeman. If I had a dream team at this point in time, it would be a very controversial dream team. My dream team would be Mkhwanazi as NASCOM. It would be somebody like Kadwa within the Hawks. It would be somebody like Khan within crime intelligence. But that's my dream team, and of course, I'm exceptionally subjective.
General Khan, you mean?
Feroz.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so let's stick to the Hawks for a while. Who's your candidate?
Musikile.
I see. I mean, she's responsible for visible policing and environment at the moment. Any reasons for her experience that would place her doing a much even better job than Libya?
Before she moved to national, she was Gauteng head of detectives. At a stage, she was head of FCS. FCS is an extremely important unit, family, child, and sexual offences. We have this GBF and femicide problem in South Africa that needs to be tackled, and maybe it needs to be tackled by a more capacitated, specialized unit. Maybe it should become a priority crime, which should then fall under the Hawks. So I like Musikile from an experience perspective, and I think she has the respect of the members, which is something very important.
Dadema Shaile, what's your take? Well, the papers are saying that Mkhwanazi is one of the considerations. I don't know. What's your view, or is there anyone else outside of Sibia, Musikidi, and Mkhwanazi that you have in mind?
I agree with Chad when he says General Mkhwanazi needs to be in the South African police outfit at national level. Why, Ntate Ndlozi? Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi is from the Special Task Force. You can see the badges on his uniform. Hence the successes in engaging violent criminals in KZN. That also tells you the ability of the man to organize intelligence successfully. So it would then mean to me when he's that other side, he'll be good for the country. Now let's go over to the Hawks and talk about General Musikidi and General Sibia. I have worked with Austibello Musikidi at Province during the times of General Mzwandile Petros when I was chairman of the board. Very effective General Musikidi, very strategic. Let me compare her to General Sibia. General Sibia is an ex-Scorpions officer. When the Scorpions were disbanded, he came over to the Hawks at the time. He was head of the Hawks in the province of Gauteng during some of our time, our moments in Gauteng. I know that he's an effective man, despite the challenges, personal and many other things that came up. Mbuyiseni, all of us in the country have seen that. But he's a very effective man. I would rather look at the experience and successes of Sibiya at the Scorpions and the successes of Sibiya during the times of General Anwar Dramat and the politics that happened to him and that led him to be suspended and ultimately dismissed from the police. But he stands a better chance in terms of understanding the systems of the Hawks and the systems of the Scorpions. But remember, Mbuyiseni, the situation now and then the Hawks in that era as well as the Scorpions before, given the issues that you have covered, ground on resources, prosecution-led institutions and that kind of stuff. The times are different. You might not have good relationships with a few individuals in all of the spaces that we have covered, and that might compromise you. In the same breath, Ausuaka Austebello might have better relations with everyone else, not knowing with your NPAs of the world, not knowing with your crime intelligence of the world, and many other things that would inform on the relationship between your operatives and operatives of other offices. Mbuyiseni, it's painful when you look at some of the police who don't want to cooperate with some of the Hawks officers. In the same flip side of the coin, when some of the Hawks officers undermine or hold other members of your law enforcement agencies in contempt and with arrogance. This is the major challenge undoing law enforcement agencies in South Africa. And I think I am focusing this out of love, out of respect, out of expertise, out of advice. The kind of relationships that we have as various units in law enforcement must be informed by reduction of crime, be it specialized organized crime, transnational organized crime, serious commercial crimes, and rape, and as well as murder, as well as abduction and kidnapping. This thing should actually be addressed, and we should not be afraid to call them to order when they do something that's unacceptable. We, meaning the people of this country, because they are saving us and they're protecting us.
If you've just joined us, this is Power Talk with me, Mbuyiseni Ndlozi, on Power 987. We are speaking the future of the Hawks. And Chad, just for your concluding remarks, if you were to write us the sort of between 3 and 5 things that must happen to strengthen the Hawks moving forward, what would those things be? Your manifesto for the Hawks.
Going back to your conversation earlier with Andy, where the two of you were preaching about prosecutorial-led investigations, if you guys were a church, I would definitely be in the front pew praising, because that's the reality. We need prosecutorial guided, and we need independence. So number one, the Hawks need to be independent. They need to have dedicated prosecutors from the NPA. They need to be specialized courts. They need the funding, they need the capacity, and to what Andy said earlier, they need to rise up to the technological challenge they're currently facing. We're living in the fourth industrial revolution. We need them to have those tools to combat the sophistication that the syndicates currently have.
Those would be your 3 things. And then, I mean, budget-wise, Andy had some proposal that I thought you might want to react to about reprioritizing some of crime intelligence resources into the Hawks.
Not a bad idea. They're already working closely together and they need to work together. However, the minister asked for an increase of 100 billion rand per annum to 189 billion rand per annum. the police allocate out of their budget only 2% of that budget to the Hawks, which is priority crime. And as we've all heard the figures previously, 23, 24, the figures allocated to VIP protection and security services was around about 3.5%, almost double that of the Hawks. So if the Hawks had to become independent and have a proper budget allocated to them and they weren't beholden to SAPS, perhaps we'd see a lot more success. So budget, resources, manpower, technology, dedicated prosecutors, and also to the points that were made earlier about dedicated courts. All of this will help to bring us to a point where perhaps we can talk about reversing this massive syndicated crime increase we're experiencing.
Dade Mashaile, what is your 3 to 5 things that must happen to improve the Hawks going into the future?
One, Ndlozi, AI-powered intelligence fusion and predictive analytics. 2, your deep web or your deep web cryptocurrency forensic strength. 3, your biometric and digital identification system. 4, your financial crime and corruption artificial intelligence. We will be able to root out the mess that happens in government departments when they have the financial crime and corruption artificial intelligence applications. 5, your cyber crime countermeasure. We will be able to do your behavioral malware analysis and ransom mitigation and many of these things that we look at as the elements, the heart and the core of operational systems in policing in the future. When we want to be successful in the future, put that platform that I've mapped out now so that those who come late into the systems, the young constables from college, have a sound understanding of technology. We should be able to track phone ya gago police station when it is stolen. You don't have to phone the cyber crime unit of SAPS. An ordinary station must be able to do that. When you escalate it to the Hawks should be able to be in a position to be able to identify and do a cross-mapping of cryptocurrency graph analytics.
And where do you place, and I'll come back to Chad about that question as well, and then we'll close the show at that note. But where do you place in this matrix collaborations with state security?
Collaboration with your domestic intelligence agency as well as your foreign intelligence services agency is key and crucial because when you look at the General Intelligence Labor Amendment, General Intelligence Laws Amendment Bill that was signed into law by Ntate Ramaphosa last month or so, it says these two institutions, DIA and FISA, FISA, they will be able to wait for your communication at Port 53. Port 53 is the bridge where information or intelligence information comes from outside of South Africa and leaves South Africa into the world. To be able to harvest, when you are doing that harvesting, you need to do a collaborative or a cooperative with the Hawks aimed and meant to extract those who might be having intentions of establishing ISIS, as we saw a leader of ISIS yesterday also appearing in court, who would be wanting to bomb or to commit terrorist activities here. So that activity of terrorism would then fall on squarely within the ambit of the core mandate of the priority crimes of this directorate. So it is not a negotiable relationship between the Hawks and DIA as well as FISA. I have deliberately used the two names because SSA is dismantled. We now have two units that operate domestically as well as internationally.
Chad, same question about the significance of that particular intelligence entity and agency in the wake of the Hawks?
SSA as well hollowed out. We're now going to see a division. Before we had the NIA and we had South African Secret Service. We're going to see it split once again. They will coordinate effectively, we hope, with the catch component of the Hawks, which is crimes against the state. But I must point out we already have a super intelligence agency in South Africa that doesn't receive the credit they should be, and that is the Financial Intelligence Center. Their powers have been increased, and they are making significant inroads in identifying criminal syndicates, money laundering, identifying assets, and working exceptionally close with other law enforcement agencies in South Africa, and even set up nodal points to bring together all the role players. So I'm not too keen on SSA at this point in time, but I'm very excited by the work that the PEAK is doing.
Chad Thomas, organized crime investigator at IRS, and Andy Mashaile, security strategist and former Interpol ambassador. Thank you both for creating time to speak to us about the Hawks and the future of priority crime investigations.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's it from us here at Power Talk, Bantwana Benkosi. Tomorrow, Sino CEO we Eskom. The CEO of Eskom is joining us at the show tomorrow to tell us about the future of energy, the state of energy and the future of energy. Not the minister, the CEO of Eskom. And so bring on those questions about the power cuts and the contracts of alternative energy sources, green energy as it were, sometimes called green energy colonization. Stay tuned for a Babi with lunch, power lunch. It's time for the news with Nyakalo Tefu. Tango!
Power News.
Thanks, Mbuyiseni. The top stories at this hour: former President Jacob Zuma suffers yet another legal defeat, and the Western Cape High Court is currently hearing arguments from the EFF as the party seeks to oppose the 4%